Welcome to Closing Conversations, a show for founders, leaders, and sellers who win together. I'm Max Notis. Today's guest is Itai Karelic, the Chief Revenue Officer at vHive, where he leads revenue across complex enterprise sales in telecom and energy. This was a really fun one because Itai lives in a world that most salespeople never see. He's not talking about hundreds of leads, quick wins, or volume-based selling. He's talking about tiny buyer universes, long sales cycles, massive accounts, and the kind of enterprise deals where trust, timing, and process matter just as much as product. We get into how he structures his team, why experience matters in deep tech sales, and one of my favorite lines from the episode, great sales leadership means showing confidence and trust, but not delusion. Let's get into it. All right, good man. All right, so do you want to just start off by sharing a little bit about yourself, your background, the whole bit?
Sure. My name is Itai Karelic. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for vHive. I'm also the co-founder of Jether Energy, though I don't have any executive capacity there anymore. Jether is, an energy trading company, mostly focused on US markets. A board advisor to Nostromo Energy, which I also help raise money for. That company operates in the realm of thermal storage, so specifically for cooling. And finally, I recently joined as an advisory board member for Spiky.ai, which is a recording and analytics platform for salespeople and sales organizations. So I guess that's my current resume. Father of 3, live in New York, I've been here now for 20 years. I love everything related to the ocean and sports that require a mouthpiece. Otherwise, it's not really a sport. It's a recreation. And happy to be here. Happy to discuss what a chief revenue officer should be doing in the tech space now, or what I think they should be doing, especially as it relates to enterprise sales. So specifically infrastructure companies such as energy and telecom companies, long sales cycles, complex sales, complex value. That, I guess, is my forte, and that's what I focus on.
All right. So I'm going to get to that, but I'm even just realizing the picture behind you is of like a beautiful beach scene. And I've got hockey pucks behind me. And I feel like we've got the opposite in sports. You like warm water. I like frozen water for my sports.
That is correct. Every time I go skiing or every time I take the kids to the Caribbean, when we're in the Caribbean, I said, who goes out skiing in a winter break when they could be doing this? And same thing when I go skiing. It's nice. But it's a way to be outdoors in the winter. That's how I see it. If there's absolutely no reason to invest too much time and effort going somewhere cold if you can go somewhere warm. That's how I see it.
I feel like that's people from warm climates. It's like, I have a cousin and he's like, I just don't like, what's the point of winter? Like, I don't get fall. And we try to let's go pumpkin picking. And he's like, oh, this is so exciting. And we're like, you don't get it. Like nonetheless. So anyway, I want to get into, everything we're here to talk about. So, you have a dead set focus and experience in enterprise sales. You manage a team that is responsible for the full customer life cycle, everything from biz dev, farmers, as you put it, customer service, you name it. So I guess, tell me, first off, how did you decide to end up in the enterprise sales space as your focus? And then I want to hear a little bit more about how you run your team.
So, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. I was originally in consulting many, many years ago, many moons ago. Luckily, I don't remember much of it. And at some point, I realized this is making me unhappy and I want to do something else. And so you start searching what does that something else means, and both in terms of purpose, economic viability, and my ability to contribute. And so I ended up looking around and I felt that being Israeli, it would make sense to join Israeli startups. They seem to be doing well. What do I want to do? What's of interest to me? At the time, I felt I want to get either into medical devices or clean tech. These are things that were close to my heart. And again, almost 20 years ago, there was a big boom in both. And medical devices is always around, but clean tech goes up and down. And I think the most natural thing for somebody that has presence, let's say it. I was an officer in the military and I'm good at reading people and maybe convincing them on doing certain things that are difficult. So I think that it was the natural thing to get into sales. I guess I could have gone into product as well, but I wasn't technically well versed enough at the time. Just ended up doing sales, and the first startup I chose. And when you choose clean tech, I didn't choose. I was interviewing for both and ended up getting an offer in a clean tech startup. You're selling to enterprise. It was the first company was called Greenlit Technologies. I'll discuss it briefly, but we were doing what's called demand response, so the reduction of electricity consumption in peak periods. Doesn't matter much. And we were doing a very specific angle of demand response. And really the customers there are large utilities like Con Edison, South California Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric. So suddenly you have this small startup, person startup that raised $1 million, needs to somehow to sell to these behemoths. And then you start realizing, okay, there's a method to this and there's a rhythm to this, and people need to understand certain things and familiarity and so on, despite limited resources. And we did okay. We didn't do great. Obviously, the startup closed, but we generated more sales than money we raised, but I guess that wasn't enough.
Oh, too bad. That's usually the recipe for success. Again, I want to hear about your company, but I do want to pick on something that you said before, how your experience in the military helped how you kind of thought about working with people and getting people to do things that they might not otherwise be excited about,
I think that's in retrospect. I don't think so. You serve in the military in very formative years, and I have a formative experience. I wouldn't take too much out of it. I would say, in order to hire good salespeople, your best bet to make an easy hire, obviously there's good hires elsewhere, is either a Division I athlete or a ex-military. And the reason is discipline. Division I athlete has to work hard and has to get up in the morning and has to grind and grind and grind and grind. And in the military, in most cases, you have to grind and grind and grind. And the unfortunate thing in enterprise sales or in any sales, you have to grind. Now, I've met great salespeople that did not have that background, but it's just a qualifier. It just says, okay, this person knows how to, half the job is being there. And then the other half is reading people and being nice to people, knowing when to push, when not to push, being technically savvy if you're in a tech startup. So, of course, there's people that know how to grind and have all that experience. It's just a filter, and so I don't think my military experience has had a lot to do with what I do today. I think at the time, though, I was younger and it made more sense to, I would put it differently. My natural aptitude is to help people do things that are hard, okay? Enterprise sales is hard. And that's why I did the cert. So I think it's more my natural aptitude rather than the experience in the military that helped.
Interesting. I have a couple of thoughts there. One, I have similar experience with you. Folks from the military, athletes, are fantastic because they know routine, they know discipline, they know rejection. Another group that I've also had really great success with is folks with theater backgrounds because they know how to practice. They're used to getting rejected. It's a similar, maybe an odd schedule that you're working on. You're working in theater and then you also are a waiter or waitress to make the ends meet. So that work ethic is there. The ability to read a script, to be personable is already there. But I've read about a lot of Israeli startups and just the tech scene in Israel. And if you drive through, Tel Aviv and the surrounding areas, I mean, you're seeing Microsoft buildings that are skyscrapers. You're seeing like an incredible boom of startups out of Israel. And I've read things along the lines of, similarly, because the entire country goes through a military program. When you leave the program, people know how to work very well together. They know how to kind of hold disciplines in a different way.
I would say a very specific set of Israelis. I would not make generalizations, but I think I want to touch on something you mentioned. Hearing no or failing and continuing. And I think you're right about theater. Theater have the other advantage is that they know how to play the room to their advantage. I never thought about that angle, but the ability to hear no and continue is the most important ability. And you're right about theater. Theater have the advantage. Maybe military and Division I might have more discipline, but theater have the advantage over them of working the room, acting, reading the room. And so I think the important point is that it's taking rejection with a stride and continuing.
I have an interesting thought. Of course, my thoughts are interesting, but I read this book where they were talking about how it was like the German soccer team in 2018 that won the World Cup. The average player started playing soccer or football like when they were 16 years old. They hadn't been these kids who had been training since 5 years old, since they were fetuses to play soccer. And they were studying this, and because they were well-rounded, it made them better soccer players when it came time to focus on it. Or how Roger Federer, whose parents, I think one of his parents was a professional tennis player, didn't start really playing tennis competitively until he was like 12 years old or something. He loved soccer. But then when he goes to play soccer, he's got great footwork, like a lot of the other tennis players don't. And so it's interesting as we're saying what backgrounds oftentimes lend themselves well to sales. It's people who weren't in sales. It's people who had other disciplines and can bring the skills from those disciplines into sales, and it tends to go well.
I think that's true for tech because the more complex the tech and the more complex the sale, right? So selling to Verizon or Deutsche Telekom, something that changes workflows and is transformational. Yes, I believe you're right. By the way, it's also true for my favorite boxer, Lomachenko. His father sent him to be a dancer, and then he became the lead dancer at the Ukrainian national, like the Russian Ukrainian dance. And that's why he has footwork that no boxer has ever had and will have after. It's just absolutely amazing. So yes, that well-roundedness I think but it works. Some other people are specialized and are hyper-focused since they're 5 years old and be champions. There's no one way to win and one way to achieve greatness. As the comedian said, we discovered about Michael Jordan that his drive is revenge. Basketball was just a hobby, right? It just turns out it would have been the same in baseball or football. It's proving people wrong was what he... So I think there's different ways of getting into greatness. Not that I believe what I do is greatness, but doing well and being the best version of yourself, there's more than one way to get there. But yeah, I tend to agree with you.
I dig that. I also wonder if the boxer is like, I'm so tired of people making fun of me for being a dancer that I'm going to do the manliest. I got to beat somebody up.
His dad was also a pretty good amateur boxer and trainer, and he had a very specific plan for his son. His dad said, you're going to dance all these years and then you're going to start boxing professionally. And then he won 2 gold medals. From it, as a fetus, his dad said he's going to be a champion. He just had a different path for him. No, it was all planned. It wasn't an error that he's one of the best ever.
I want to talk about how you, in running your team, because, enterprise sales is a team sport. The account executive is the quarterback, they always say. There's so many moving parts to this. So you oversee, how many people was it you said on your team?
There's 17 people.
17 people. It's a lot of moving parts and personalities. Can you just tell me about the team breakdown? Who's responsible for what? And then how do you manage them? How do you lead them? How do you work with all those different personalities to make sure that customer goes from, oh, that's an interesting idea, to, I love working with this company and I would tell my friends all about it?
There's one person that does the RevOps. So she's responsible, she's implemented Salesforce, she's implementing all kinds of tech stacks that are related to the revenue engine and make sure people do what they're supposed to be doing. Also on the enablement, sales enablement repository and all those things, making sure marketing gives us what we need. So that's the classic behind the scenes of sales that's critical so you can have an actual engine that works. Then I would divide it into 3, which is the hunters, just classic. It's not a logo yet, you have to hunt. On the farming side, we have accounts. Once you close an account and after 2 or 3 years, you reach a certain plateau. And at that point, or not a plateau, but the growth, there's not going to be a growth anymore, or not a significant one. And now you have to maintain the customer. These are multi-million-dollar customers, very large enterprises. So there's the hunting team, farming team. And then I would call the tech sales team, which is, I like the name. These people help the sales directors either pre or post sales with everything related, whether it's a POC or post sales, digging with the customer into certain technological queries and working with product. So those are the 3 ones, the people that do the tech sales side, the people that do the hunting side, the people that do the farming side, where the emphasis is on the hunting. There's still a lot of growth and most of the people are on the hunting side.
I think that's typical of a tech startup, that you have to be, you're digging for you have to dig harder than other people to get recognition, to be taken seriously, to get the at-bats.
Yes, you don't have what I find is, not always, there's very, very good salespeople at large organizations as well, but typically when you interview them, they go, yes, and I closed this multi-million-dollar deal and this $50 million deal or the 30 million. Yes, but your ability to walk into that meeting was influenced by the fact that it says Ericsson or it says Google or it says ServiceNow. The people will take a meeting with you just because you represent such a large organization. Whereas with us, it's much more difficult. So once you've established that trust that comes is also a personal trust rather than just a brand trust, right? I trust Siemens because it's a German entity that's been around forever and they're known for their engineering and so on. Whereas with us, it's a little bit different. So I tend to agree with you. You do have to hunt, and it's a lot harder to hunt as a startup than it is when you're in a large organization.
1000%. I've never had, I'm putting in quotes, the luxury of selling at a household name company. I've been at companies mostly that are in the startup space, and they'll say, we don't want someone from Google, for example, because you're Google, they're coming from Google. Like, there are people lining up at the door to talk to you. Whereas at a startup, you're the underdog. They don't know your name. They don't totally trust that you can do what you do, for a zillion reasons. And now, I'm not saying that selling at a big organization is easy. It comes with its own difficulties. I have a friend who sells for Adobe, and you're competing against Google. You're competing against, so it's got its own things. But at the startup, as you and I understand, it's so digging and it's a lot of rejection. So how does your team go about bringing in leads? What are the expectations for your hunters, and how are you managing them? How are you training them, working with them?
So first and foremost, we operate in two verticals. And up until recently, we operated exclusively in the telecom vertical, and now we operate also in the energy. I want to separate the two, and I think they're both telling. So in the telecom space, the reality is that there are very few logos I can chase, right? You know those logos. They're called Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. And if you don't close with any of the three, you're dead. If you don't close with any of the three big operators in the United States, there is no reason for you to exist. And same thing in Europe. If you don't have a large customer like Deutsche Telekom, then nobody's ever going to take you seriously. So this isn't a classic MQL to SQL or BDR. I don't have outbound, inbound the way most people do. Okay. My world is very, very, very different. There are so many heads of network globally, right? There's the head of networks for AT&T, head of networks for T-Mobile, head of networks for Verizon, head of networks for America Mobile, which controls 40% of the Latin American mobile. Then there's the head of networks for Tigo Millicom, which is another about 30% of that. Singtel in Asia, Vodacom in Africa. There's just a few, Vodafone in Europe, Orange in Europe. There's not a lot of names you can pursue, and not a lot of decision makers you're going to pursue. So the list of, let's say, decision makers is pretty small. It's pretty small. Now they have a lot of influencers around them. So you really have to touch about 60 people and convince about 10 to 20 of them before you can make a sale. And in that type of organization, where every 2 years you have a new round, or every 2 or 3 years a new round of restructuring, timing is also critical. So I would say, all in all, they know the name. You know the names of what they're chasing. They know the names of what they're chasing, and they're being chased also by Ericsson and Nokia and all the other giants. So I have to compete with the giants, and I have to make sure I'm more visible and I offer greater value than everybody else, and I move faster. And I also need that my team to build trust. So you build trust, A, a personal trust, and B, trust in the brand. I'm happy to say today I believe in the telecom space, in the specific niche of digitization. I think whether people are our customers or not, they trust that we are the premier brand in digitization for telecom. So there aren't a lot of leads. It's not MQL, SQL. It's not what it really is conferences, chasing people, talking to them. And the sales process could be 18 months before you get a PO, and could be another 2 years before you really generate 3, 4, 5, $10 million or above per customer. So that's the life cycle. It's very, very difficult, very different from what most people do.
So I was just thinking, so you're hunters, and I feel like oftentimes at companies, hunters are the greener employees. They're younger, they're newer to the workforce. Your hunters have to really know the telecom space. They have to really know what they're doing, because you only have, let's say, 60 names that you're going after. You can't just call them, email them, and just be like a fly on their ear and they're like annoyed. Like, you have to really be able to get in front of them and have them respect what you're saying and appreciate.
You're still going to be a fly on their ear. You're suddenly, even if they worked at a much bigger company before and they know the person, they're like, oh, Max, oh, who are you with now? Really? I need to talk. I remember I bought from you, and that's where we discover who really had relationships, or who had relationships because they were at Ericsson or because they were at Amdocs. And that is the big difference. You're still going to be a fly on their ear, but I guess just don't be annoying.
That's kind of what I was getting at. In sales, you have to be the fly on the ear to some, like, there's the power of persistence, but in this case, it's not just spamming them. It's, I have to really know what I'm talking about. Or as you're saying, I have to have like existing relationships that I can work on and strings to pull to get introductions made for me. And as it turns over every 2 years, it's a never ending process.
And familiarity. Oh, I don't know you, but do you remember Kevin? Oh yeah, where did you work with Kevin? Yes, when I was, there needs to be some type of familiarity.
You're not hiring folks that are new. You're hiring experienced people who are doing this. They need to have existing relationships.
I'm an ageist to the other side. When people typically look for younger people, I think I did have a sales director in energy who started the energy vertical for us. We've since switched to a much more senior person. He also left for personal reasons. And he was absolutely great, relentless young person that doesn't get phased out by no. But in energy, there's many more customers to pursue. The deal size is smaller. And again, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars, but not the same. And there's many more renewable developers, operation maintenance companies. So there it was more the MQL, MQL to SQL, some outbound. And so I do have that in one of my verticals. It is the newer vertical. It does generate still less sales. But yes, everybody that works for me is very experienced.
All right. So your hunters, they're experienced. They've got relationships. It's a matured biz dev operation you got going on.
Sales, not biz dev. I have a different biz dev guy who's also mature. And
so you have these experienced folks that are networking and working relationships to bring in the right people for meetings. Now, your next entity you were talking about is farmers.
Farmers also experienced, nobody under 35. I'm not going to let you manage $5 to $10 million, in terms of customers and speaking to SVPs and AVPs, etc., without you knowing what you're doing.
It's like the president. You can't do it unless you're 35.
To some extent, yes.
So can you tell me then so hunters, they work, they're proper salespeople. They've now closed the deal and it goes to farmers more or less. Maybe the hunter's still involved in a little.
I would say even after closing the deal, you still have to be in a semi-hunting mode for another year and a half. So even if you signed a MSA and a global agreement and you have the first $1 million in, etc., it still takes time because there's still more API integration and more integrations into other systems and upsell, not from a farming perspective, but more, you're still a large telco. It takes it time to really absorb you as a vendor. And so during that time, we don't transition. We only transition when we feel, okay, things are fully integrated. We're coasting. Now it's about maintaining the relationship and making sure everybody's happy.
Totally. I mean, with a large telco, it's not like plugging into a wall outlet. It's like plugging into a whole circuit board, and it's complex and difficult and tedious. So you have to have a lot of hands on the account to make sure that it goes the way you want and that it keeps progressing. So this is a combination of the hunters and the farmers.
Correct. At some point, we decide to transition, and at the point that we need, we transition to the farming. Yeah.
That makes sense. So when it's in the pure farming stage, it's not just account management. It's similarly making sure that systems stay connected as things change, that you're moving with the changes. Can you tell me about that?
I would say, I'll give an example. So 2 of the accounts are companies that own infrastructure in at least 15 countries each, if not more, and about more than 30,000 cell towers each. So we're talking a massive portfolio across all of Latin America, Europe, Africa, etc., between those 2 companies. So the farmer for those 2 companies has to maintain relationship with corporate, right? Has to make sure there's ongoing API integration and updates and stuff like that. Has to try to upsell as well because we have new features, and if they want to buy them, they buy them. In some cases, they do. But also has to make sure all the country managers in all those places are happy. So he has periodic calls with them, periodic training. The tech sales associated with him makes sure that people use the updated version of this, because we release software updates every 2 weeks. There's no point in training every 2 weeks, but every few months, he takes the technical people and the salespeople of my customer's organization and goes through all the updates, all the new features, make sure they use it properly. We measure usage. We, of course, have other benchmarks in terms of revenue that we measure. So a lot of that is done online, but then he has to tour the world. He has to go and meet in person. So he will meet with at least the major country managers at least once a year, make sure that they're happy, and they'll have workshops of requests they have and so on. So, and then he has the regional VPs he has to contend with. So he's got to touch also about 60 people on a yearly basis physically. I physically meet them, take them to dinner, and not just beyond the ongoing online presence that he has. That's what farming a large global account is. It's you have to A, maintain the relationship, B, make sure that they're happy in many ways, and C, make sure the revenue targets from the customer, right? Because these are long-term relationships, are met. You have to make sure that they're happy forever, yes. If anybody ever worked in telecom, they'll be like, yeah, that's right. I'm happy with our customer, with our customers. I do feel They treat us as partners because we're essential to many of the things they do, but they are always demanding. And that's part of the psyche in telecom. They're always demanding.
It's a lot. That's a lot.
It's a lot. Yes, it's a lot. As I tell my team, if it was easy, anybody would do it.
That's totally fair. And now what's the third or final part of?
The tech sales guy are associated with both hunting and farming. So they are in pre-sales, they help run the POCs, POVs, and the technical aspects of sales meetings when the engineers walk into the room, etc. And they support the hunters, the sales directors. And then post-sales, after that, they work with product. They make sure people are trained. They identify issues ahead of time where the customer, sometimes even bugs, just not even QA, but they can identify a bug ahead of time. So they really cover the tech stack top to bottom, bottom to top. And they have interactions with everybody in that organization, again, from line managers, let's call it, to all the way to assistant vice presidents, etc., at the request of either the hunter or the farmer.
So they're the integrators. They're the technical support.
No, the integration, the API is done by R&D. They are the guys that make sure no technical aspect is left unanswered, both in pre and post sales.
Gotcha. Okay, so like a sales engineer.
Correct. It's like a sales engineer with very, very, very high technological capabilities. Correct. I have to run a small team. They have to be very capable. I can't have sales engineers pre-sales, sales engineers pro-sales. It just doesn't make sense. It also makes their job a lot more interesting because they transition from one to the other. And I think they do enjoy that their job is not monotonous.
For me, quite honestly, this has been really eye-opening because I personally have never worked in the telecom space. I've worked at companies where you're going after that small set of people and you really have to know what you're doing. But I mean, you've got a really mature team working with you. They've done this before. They're the best and the brightest at what they're doing. Now, I want to ask about managing them and leading them because, you know, I was thinking about this, like Michael Jordan had a coach. He was the best at what he did, but he still had a coach and a dietitian and a trainer and all sorts of things. How do you manage these folks so that you're giving value, but also giving enough space so they can do what they're best at?
It's a little bit like the French say, it's je ne sais quoi. I'm not sure how to become a sales leader or not how to become a sales leader. Part of it is innate abilities and part of it is the ability to learn. This is also an innate ability. Ultimately, you have to exude confidence and trust, but not be delusional. Because if you're in sales and in technology sales, you're always going to be overly optimistic. And the most difficult thing is to help people build a proper forecast. Because when your sales cycle is 12, 18, 24 months, it's very difficult to understand where you are in the cycle. And it's very difficult also to continue grinding without seeing what others are doing or getting the support. So I think that's mostly what I do, which is I took MEDDIC. All sales frameworks lack the aspect of time. In the sense that if you're doing MEDDIC, it tells you who you need to talk to, but not when you need to talk to them and how long it's going to take. So it would be us being a tech company, I've built what is called a sprint plan. So sprints, for those who are unfamiliar with software development, a lot of companies work in sprints where every 2 weeks you release a new feature or you fix a bug. And so you work in 2-week sprints. And sometimes you don't release, sometimes certain features takes 3, 4, 5, could take 10 sprints even to finish the development, right? It's the same thing. So let's take the 18 months that we have ahead of time and break it down to 2 weeks at a time. Now, contract negotiation might take 3 months. Okay, that's fine. You write that down as 6 sprints. And now if you start on April 1st, by when do you need to finish? Or by when do you have to have red lines and stuff like that? And so now I can tell, and they can tell if they're a month behind, 2 months behind, 3 months behind, 2 weeks ahead of time. Without that, there's no forecast and you don't know where you are on the process. So it's not just the MEDDIC, that framework and also building a map, it's putting a timestamp to it and holding them and myself accountable so you have a proper forecast. So I think ultimately a lot of it is about helping them manage the process and understanding when maybe 6, 7 months ahead of that, this deal is I'm probably going to lose it. I'm not going to put as much effort because I'm so far behind and there's so little engagement and so on and so forth. I'm never going to get there in the time frame that I need to meet my targets. I might as well allocate my resources somewhere else. And given the fact that we're a global company, I have a guy sitting in Singapore and one of the customers so some customers are 2-3 hour flight away and some customers are 8 hours flight away. And so that's now for a meeting, that's 3 days gone instead of for, Manila, it's same day in and out. And if the process somewhere where it's a 6-hour flight suddenly takes longer, well, I have to allocate the resources and I have to help him understand where he's at and maybe manage his pipeline a lot better. So a lot of it is helping them manage the pipeline and then giving them an overall overview of what's happening in the US versus what's happening in APAC, what's happening in EMEA, and helping them learn from one another. I don't think I answered the question very, very well, so I'll try to summarize. The good thing about managing a more experienced group is that the expectations are higher and they're supposed to know what they're doing. It's easier from that perspective. It's a little bit more difficult to teach an old dog new tricks, but people have to learn. And I think what I need to provide them is the framework of what worked, what should work, how do we manage the pipeline, 30,000 foot overview. And then when they need me to get into who's bad cop, who's good cop, how do we negotiate, how do we, in the meetings where they need executive support. That really is my job if I summarize the last 3 minutes of conversation.
It's really interesting. I have two thoughts here. A lot of the folks that I work with are under 35. I work with a lot of folks over 35, and it's a different way of working with them. It just is, just like teaching high school is very different than teaching elementary school. I don't know if that's the right comparison, but when you're working with folks who are greener, there's a lot more grit, I feel like, that has to go into it, because it's like, I'm a sled dog. I got to show them how to trudge through the snow. And the only way to do that is to do it with them. There's a lot that goes into it. Whereas someone who's 35, they've already learned how to go through the snow. And I need to more so just make sure that, hey, there's a lake, don't go into that. Oh, this is too far downhill, don't do that. And so when you're working with these more mature folks, you're support. You're trusting that they can operate, a little autonomously, but you're supporting them, guiding them, managing expectations, it sounds like. And I loved one of the things that you just said, as a leader, you have to exude confidence and trust, but not be delusional. And I feel like by doing that, you're setting the tone. Sales is a lot of rejection. It's a lot of pain. Even if you've been in it forever, it's easy to get down. But at the same time, I lose all trust in that optimism if I'm delusional and I say things that are not going to work are going to work. And I don't know.
And I would say ultimately, people stay in the careers that either chose them or that they chose. But if you're a good salesperson when you're 40, it means you are essentially an optimist. And that optimism can become delusional if there's not a 30,000 foot view that says, hold on, is that really what the meeting was about? Is that really what's happening? Do you really think you can close this in 6 months? What makes you think that? Map out for me how it's closed in 6 months. And then you go, oh yeah, that's right. It's actually going to take about 9 months at the stage we are. And it helps. I can provide a forecast to my board. Otherwise, it's very difficult. But more importantly, it helps them manage the process. And 6 months in, not saying, why am I not closing? No, they realize ahead of time, I knew where this would be headed.
That's huge. So you're making sure that they're not walking into, oh my God, how did this not happen? Hey, I'm actually pointing out, for example, like red flags that are along the way. Maybe let's push this back. And so they don't run into that. They're hitting their expectations consistently.
They're hitting the customer's expectations, and therefore they're able to close because they map out ahead of time everything that can go wrong or everything that can go right and how to manage it. And I think ultimately, as you said, when you're younger, you have more energy. These people have families. And the good thing is, if you use the sled example, they already smelled snow. They know what the old tracks are. They don't have the same energy, but they don't have to spend as much energy because they already know how to manage the snow. So it's just helping them and reminding them exactly as you said, hey, look, I can see, because I'm standing on the sled, I can see the tracks there. And all you have to tell them, hey, the tracks are there. And then they're just going to go that direction and help them go through that.
That's interesting. I love that what you're saying. If you're in sales over 40, you're an optimist. And it's like, yeah, it's easy to get caught up and you think it's going to go well. But it's nice to have someone to say, hey, reminder, like, I know that you've gone there before, but you're forgetting how exhausting it is to go there. And you may even be a little older now. Like the line I heard, was it in BoJack Horseman? When you're wearing rosy lenses, all of the red flags just look like flags. So it's nice to have someone in your corner to say, I know, like, it's good that you're an optimist, but let me help manage your expectations so you stay that way.
And we have one of my sales guys. We're working now on a very large deal with a very large operator named the Region, and he's already sold to them in his previous life a $3 million software deal, right? So the people and I'm not talking a long time ago, I'm talking in the last 5 years, he's done that with them. So I'm giving general names that just so people can identify. And so he knows how procurement works. He knows the buyer because the buyer will be the same buyer, the decision maker from him. And so when I warn about the red flags, he goes, yes, but it's actually red and white flag because if we tell him this, because he's already sold to him, when I point the red flags, he says, yes, but it's a much better conversation because I don't just point the red flag. He already knows how to overcome it in a way, even though he hasn't considered it, because he remembers what the process was when he did it previously at the different company that he was at. So I think you also have to respect a lot their perspective because they've actually been there, done that.
Interesting. You're kind of using that negative or former negative as to flip into a positive.
Not necessarily negative, but I say, okay, you want to avoid a price discussion. You want to address a value discussion, okay? Because that's where the sales process was headed. And so, okay, so we were able to avoid the price discussion and bring it back to a value discussion because then you're in a much better position to negotiate. And so when I say, well, this is how we should negotiate now that we brought it back to a value discussion, and he goes, that's not how this person likes to negotiate. He likes to negotiate X, Y, Z. So I helped him frame the conversation back in track so we don't just talk about price, okay? Because sometimes you get bogged down, you get sidelined by the procurement and go into that, and I kind of helped him. But then the actual how to do what we're trying to do, what we were able to adjust to, he's also very good at because he's done that before. At the same company with a different type of software suite that doesn't compete with ours, but he knows how to sell them a $3 million software deal.
All right. So I can't believe this, but we are actually already at time. I got to tell you, for me, this was really interesting. Like, I've never thought about, like, you know what you do. You get used to the world that you live in. Running a team where it's such entirely mature people, such a complicated sale to a smaller audience. And I got to say, my favorite part of the conversation was hearing about how you go about leadership with them. I don't know if you saw, but I was writing down a lot of the quotes you said because I want to remember them.
No, I know I'm in a very unique position. Every time I go to a CRO conference or I meet some other CROs and they go, how many customers do you serve? What? Really? And I say, hey, it's either there's not a long list of customers and everything is relationship. And I got 3 in the US. So I closed 1 and I need to close the other 2. And it's just everything is massive. Every deal is transformative to the organization. And it's a very, very, very different environment than what most sales leaders experience.
I think it's fascinating. I feel like a lot of it is transferable. I think I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I got to tell you, I feel like there's so much more to talk about. When we were talking earlier, we were saying about how salespeople, they're afraid to go to the no. They forgot to do that, things like that. We'll have to have you back on another episode. And I feel like there's a lot more we could talk about.
Let's do 6 to 8 months from now when we have much more traction in energy and have a vertical that looks similar to others where we do have MQLs, SQLs, we have a built-in process, a much more familiar revenue engine, still relationship-based. We're still talking about very large utilities and very large private equities that buy, but you don't have 3 customers, you have maybe 100 customers. Still a very small number, but much larger. And I am looking forward to that experience, being able to win in a very different sales environment. So I'm looking forward to that. Happy to come back when I have a different set of experiences.
I call a little bit of bullshit. I think that you think everything's going to be good just because it's summer and it's nice out again.
I think that's the optimist in the salesperson, right? That's going back to optimism in sales, yes.
You could be in your water sports, like everything will be good. Okay, awesome. So Itai, thank you so much for joining. We'll do this again. And before any of that, I'm going to meet you in the city and we're going to have a drink.
Thank you very much. This was a pleasure.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Closing Conversations. Huge thanks to Itai Karelic for joining me. Really sharp conversation and a great reminder that in enterprise sales, especially in deep tech, there's no hiding behind volume. You need judgment, patience, process, and the ability to keep moving without lying to yourself about where a deal actually stands. If you liked this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with somebody who gets something out of it. For more on building sales teams that actually deliver, visit www.commissionsales.com. We'll see you next time. And until then, let's get closing. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget, you can always catch us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more episodes of Closing Conversations.